Hey everyone, this is Mark Ryan coming at you with another video. Today we're looking at a response from James White to John Piper, an article that he wrote to John Piper we're going to call it Eating Joe's Cookies, because that's what James White calls it, and I love it. I think it's amazing. And what that is, hey, if you don't eat Joe's cookies, then you lose your job. If you don't eat Joe's cookies, then you can't travel. If you don't eat Joe's cookies, then essentially you don't get services. You're a second-class citizen. That's what we're talking about, the authoritarianism and everything that comes with it. Now, I'm going to summarize most of the article, and then the very end of it, I'm going to read it like as best as I can, to be honest. But hey, it starts out with James White pointing out John Piper handling Trump versus Biden last year during election season. And Piper, he points out that Piper he tends to get really excited about something. He tends to see something and it just becomes passionate about it, really. And so he looks at scripture, and a lot of people will say, hey, Trump, you can't vote for Trump. Why? Because he tweets mean things compared to Joe Biden, right? Well, John Piper kind of took exception with that and kind of exposed, no, it's much deeper than that. And he got really excited and passionate about it and basically said, I can't vote for either because Trump tweets mean things and it's actually really, really bad. And so John Piper kind of gets excited about a tree and ignores the whole entire forest that the tree's in. And that's what James White basically points out here. Now, between James White and John Piper, you can see two different views. John Piper thinks that, like, Joe's cookies, they're amazing, they're great. If you eat Joe's cookies, things will probably go well for you compared to those who don't eat it. Whereas James White, he is much more skeptical towards Joe's cookies. He wants to see the long-term effects of eating Joe's cookies, which, hey, is reasonable, I would think. And so you see the two different views of Joe's cookies to begin with. Now, James White, he basically points out that as John Piper talks about freedom, you are free, you're a free man. Well, that's not the heart and soul of John Piper's argument. The heart and soul of the argument was basically a promotion video for eating Joe's cookies. And John Piper basically asserts, hey, all the evidence is that if you eat Joe's cookies, they're safe, they're effective, and there's probably no side effects. That's basically what was communicated in the article, and James White takes exception to that. James White basically says, John Piper, you dismiss the other side. You dismiss the folks saying, you know what, maybe eating Joe's cookies has side effects, and there's no long-term studies on eating Joe's cookies. And there have been experts that have come out and said, we don't think you should eat Joe's cookies. You kind of dismiss them. You should have at least engaged in their argumentation rather than just kind of brushing them off. But what we really need is, hey, a debate. We need John Piper and James White to either debate or if we don't want something kind of that, controversial, hey, just sit down at the same table, have a discussion for everyone to see, and just talk about it for a good hour, 2 hours, whatever, unfiltered. If I had to shave my beard to see something like that, I might do it. I would love to see them just kind of go at it in Christian love, of course, right? Now, James White brings up Singapore, and he's brought up other nations before, like Israel and the UK, but he says Singapore, no one has eaten more of Joe's cookies than in Singapore. No one. And yet in Singapore, the hospitals are flooded, if you know what I mean. And so why don't you wrestle through stuff like that, John Piper? There's people that are bringing out this stuff that even nations that have really, really bought into and eaten Joe's cookies, and they have the highest rates of people eating Joe's cookies. It's still having some major consequences of hunger. It's not solving the hunger problem, if you know what I'm saying. James White also points out that, hey, this has never been done before. We've never had something where people have said, hey, you have to eat Joe's cookies for your hunger problem. And if you don't eat Joe's cookies, then you lose your job. You are a second-class citizen, basically. We've never responded to hunger this way. We've responded to hunger in other ways where you eat healthy, you exercise, you stay in shape. But no one's ever said, hey, you must eat everyone on planet Earth must eat Joe's cookies. And he also points out some of the corruption. Hey, John Piper, why didn't you talk about the big cookie stores? They're making a killing. They're making trillions of dollars over people being forced to eat Joe's cookies. Why don't you talk about that corruption at all? Why doesn't that come into the equation? Why don't you talk about Joe's friends and the corruption that's going on with Joe's friends that are forcing you to eat Joe's cookies? There's authoritarianism there. There's totalitarianism there. Why aren't you talking about that, John Piper? You seem kind of silent on those things. Maybe you should talk about that a little bit more. You're narrowing your focus on trying to get people to eat Joe's cookies because you think that they will fix everything. There's no side effects. They're perfectly safe. But why don't you talk about basically the elephant in the room? He basically says, John Piper, you're looking at a tusk, and you're ignoring the entire elephant. You're passionate. You see this one thing, you're passionate about it. You wrote an article about the thing that you're passionate about. That's good. And he says, John, I agree with you. If someone wants to eat Joe's cookies, we shouldn't condemn them. We shouldn't look down upon them. We're all in agreement there. But basically, James says, hey, you've got a fragmented worldview. You're zeroed in like a microscope on this one thing. You're missing the bigger picture. You're missing the elephant in the room because you're focused on the toenail. That's what he's saying. And as Christians, we have to be thinking about the authoritarianism, the totalitarianism. We have to be thinking about the bigger picture and not just the small, narrowed down picture that John Piper's looking at. Now, I'm going to read the end of the article that Dr. James White wrote. I'm going to change some words. Hopefully you can understand this. I'm reading on my phone, so bear with me too. It says, Dr. Piper completely missed the reality of the connection of the mandated eat Joe's cookies or lose your job, your business, your freedom, your children, essentially your life. And hey, that's a grand slam in my book. That's part of the picture that John Piper never addressed. He zeroed in on this one thing. Hey, you're free, but he misses the bigger picture. He never speaks into it. Kind of the same thing with the election between Trump and Biden. He says, how can this not be part of one's calculations? We all know that these cookies will not be the end of the series. It won't just be one cookie. You'll have to eat 2 and 3 and another one. Just give it some time. James White basically goes on to say, hey, once you do as you're told and you eat that first cookie, on what basis do you object to eating the second cookie and the third and the fourth, and so on? And hey, the nutritional authorities, they've said that this is like a hunger crisis. This is a public emergency health crisis. Who gets to determine those things? Especially, he says, once they consider transgender pronouns and things like that a public health issue. He says it is undeniable that eating Joe's cookies is not a solo issue. They're coming to us after mandates saying that you have to wear a napkin, and the government, hey, closing churches, pastoral imprisonments. And before the next onerous demands from the government, hey, it's drunk on power, that inevitably comes from the rise of secularism. You have James White who, hey, I think he gets it. He's talking about the rise of secular humanism. He sees the big picture. John Piper, that's not in his view at all, in his pastoral advice there. I don't get it. James White goes on to say why Piper does not see the role that eating Joe's cookies play in the overall demands of the newly empowered totalitarianism, I cannot say, but it is not the first time he has missed the role a particular element plays in the whole. Because again, he's zeroed in on that one thing and becomes passionate about it, overwhelmed by it, shocked and stunned by it. And hey, maybe he's gleaned a lot of wisdom there. I get it, but you still have to see the whole picture. Mean, arrogant tweets are, in the overall scheme of things, significantly less important than the fact that the Biden regime is intent upon forcing your children to celebrate drag queens, and likewise just as intent upon taking control of every aspect of your life to force you to live in denial of the lordship of Christ. What Piper has missed badly is the role these eating Joe's cookies play in a much bigger, much more basic movement into a technologically based, chemically and medically controlled secular totalitarianism. The elephant is intent upon staying, and until we are all intent upon removing him from the living room, he will continue to create soul-destroying havoc for all. Oh, that John Piper would stop examining the tip of one of his tusks and help us all with the bigger issue. And so again, that's the essence of James White response. He's saying, John Piper, you're missing the big issue here. You're looking at one tree in the whole entire forest. Get on the same page. And it was kind of shocking hearing. I listened to John Piper talk about it, I think twice. But it was like, do we see the same picture here? Are we looking at the same thing? Because you're so zeroed into this one kind of random thing that, hey, people are worried that if they eat Joe's cookies, that other people will think less of them, and there's peer pressure not to eat Joe's cookies going on. He's zeroed in on that. And meanwhile, you have people losing their jobs, their livelihoods, can't feed their families, can't pay the bills if they don't eat Joe's cookies. And John Piper doesn't go there. It's like he doesn't see it. He doesn't get it. In this article, he doesn't address it. It's like he's pretending it doesn't exist. I don't know. But a lot of people were pretty shocked that he never talked about the elephant in the room. He zeroed in on this one thing. Anyways, that's my thoughts on this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And with that, I will see you in the next video.